So this is pretty easy as long as you have the steps to do it. And since you'll be working homework problems and taking a test with your notes, then you'll have the steps sitting in front of you. Okay, so it's just a matter of kind of walking through the steps that I'm about to give you. All right, so when we talk about an outlier, we're talking about a data value that's really high or really low. Okay, something that doesn't seem to fit in your data set. You guys know, like from real life experience, kind of what happens when you have a number in a data set that's too big or too small. So like you think about when you take a test with a class of students, okay? And let's say that, you don't have to write this down, but I'm just gonna put some numbers up here. Let's say that test grades for your class looked like, you know, somebody made a 70, somebody made a 68, someone made a 72, someone made a 71, and then somebody made 100. Okay, we'll just say it's a small class, just 5 students, and those were the grades. And so if the teacher's going to do an average for those 5 grades, they're going to add those up and divide by 5, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me do it real quick. All right, so I get an average of 76. Okay, now that to me is suspect because look at your grades. All 4 of those grades are actually underneath the average, right? So if I'm looking at that as a class average, that's not very realistic. Like that's not a good number for me to be looking at to say, hey, my class made a 76 as an average. Why is the average so much higher than all 4 of these grades? Why? What happened? This guy right here, he threw it off, right? Like we don't want, if everybody in the class is making C's and somebody's fixing to calculate an average, we don't want somebody to make 100 because when that average gets pulled up and it's not really accurate anymore. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this 100 is probably an outlier. Okay, it's really high compared to the other values in the data set. So what we want to be able to do is find those outliers and then throw out. Like I would have been better off if I had thrown the 100 out and calculated the average without it. So like 70, 68, 72, 71, divide by 4. Do it right here. So if I do that, my average goes down to a 70. That looks a lot better given those 4 grades, right? Also reported that 3 times. But they can't find them. They come in here and they're like, no, there's no loss. I'm like, yeah, there is. All right. So let's look at this. Let's look at the steps for finding that outlier. Once we prove that it's too high or too low, then we can throw it out. We can do our calculations without it. All right, it's the idea. All right, so these are the steps. I'm going to let you guys jot them down, and then we're going to look at an example. Okay, so 4 steps that you have to do to determine if something is an outlier. The question that she asked something that on last time's material. Oh, sure. I'm gonna go back and do it later. Okay, you guys got that? All right, so we're gonna take those steps and we're gonna look at an example and just kind of work through the example looking for an outlier. All right, so let's take a minute and write down those numbers. All right, and we'll make that our example. All right, so remember that the first step is to find the Q1 and the Q3. Okay, so that's step one. All right, so we did that on Monday, Monday. Right, so remember that you're going to make that a percentile and then work with the percentile formula. So do you remember for Q1, what percentile is the same as Q1? Just remember we had, for the quartiles, we had 3 of them. Remember the one in the middle, we said was the 50th percentile because it sat right in the middle of the number line, right? So do you remember what Q1 was?
25.
25. Okay, so this is the same as the 25th percentile. Okay, so I've got to know that. And then I can use my C formula to figure out what the Q1 is. All right, so remember your formula is N times P over 100. So what do we use for the N?
N is
N stands for
Number of values.
number of values. So I'm going to count my values and I have 11, right? Okay, so 11 is going to go in for the N. Okay, what am I going to use for the P? P stands for percentile, right? We're looking at the 25th percentile. And then I'm going to calculate that number. And remember that I'm paying attention here to whether I get a decimal or I get a whole number. So when I work this out, I get 2.75. Okay. All right, so what did we say to get a decimal? What do you do with that decimal value? Round it and you round it up, right? So we go up to 3, and then we're going to pick the third number in the list once the list is in order. Okay, so I've got to take a minute and put my list in order so that I count the right number out. All right, so let me do that real quick. All right, so I've got 35 and 40. 60, 100, 110 is there twice, 20, 120,
And then 130,
30,
150, and then 160.
and 140 in between, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. 140, 150, 160. Okay. So now I want to find the third number in the list, because the C is 3, right? So the third number would be 60, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so Q1 is 60. Okay, and then I need to do the same thing for Q3, right? So I say to myself, Q3 is the same as what percentile? What percentile is the Q3?
It was 75.
75. Okay, so yes. All right, so you want to remember that that's always the case. So if Q1, you're looking at Q1, that is your 25th percentile. Q3 is always your 75th percentile. All right, so we'll do the same thing. We'll set up our formula. All right, we still have 11 numbers. This time for the p-value, we're going to plug in what? 75. So 11 times 75 divided by 100 is going to give me 8.25. Again, decimal. So we round it up. So it's going to round to 9. And then we're going to pick the 9th number in the list. Okay, so we count through. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're at 140.
I have a question.
All right, any questions with that part? That's the first step.
Okay, so no matter what the decimal is, you always round up to the
You round it up. If it's got a decimal, you round it up. Okay. All right, step 2. It says find the IQR. IQR stands for inner quartile range, and we find it by subtracting. All right, so Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to do that next. So IQR, Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to do 140 minus 60. And that's going to give me 80. No, that's going to give me, yeah, that's going to give me 80. All right, third step is to take that IQR and multiply it by 1.5. Right, so for the third step, I am going to take the 80 and multiply by 1.5. 120. Okay, so for the last step, we can go back and look at what it actually says, but I want to try to explain that last step to you just for a second. So what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to come up with a range of values where we can say, okay, from here to here is not too high or not too low, okay? So we start out with the quartiles. So I start out with like 60 because that was Q1 and 140. Okay, and so the idea is that anything in between 60 and 140 is definitely not going to be too high or too low. Okay, those are going to be definitely fine. And then what I want to do is I want to take that range from 60 to 140 and I may want to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so I want to come to the left a little bit. And I want to come to the right a little bit and extend my okay range, just a little bit on either side. Okay, now the amount that I want to extend it on either side is this amount. All right, so that's what we calculated, that 120. On step 3, we're going to extend in both directions that amount. So if I'm sitting at 140 and I go 120 more down the number line, where am I going to be stopping?
260.
260, okay? And so we get that by taking, this is what step 4 says, we're going to take Q3 and we're going to add that number. Okay, so it was 140 plus 120 gave me 260. So that was part of what we wrote down for step 4, was to add it to Q3. And then the other part, coming back to the left, we would need to subtract it, right? So we would take our 60. We would take our Q1, we wrote it right there. Take our Q1. And we'll subtract the 120. So 60 minus 120 is going to give me a negative 60. Okay, so the idea, what we've done now is we've said that any number between, and I'm going to write this down, any number between negative 60 and positive 260 is okay. Not too high, not too low. So look at your numbers. I'm going to say that all of my numbers are between negative 60 and positive 260, right? Do you agree with that? So this particular data set does not have any outliers. Okay, so there are no outliers in this data set. So what if we had had a data value of, say, 300? Would that have been an outlier? Okay, because it's bigger than 260. What if I had a value that was negative 100? Would that be an outlier? Negative 100. It would be out here, right? That was split? Yes. Okay, so that would also be an outlier. So as long as you're between negative 60 and positive 260, you're good. Anything else outside of that range would be an outlier.